The Longines Zulu Time is definitely the pinnacle release from Longines this year, but I have one question for you. Blue or black? Welcome back to Time on the Wrist at Chisholm Hunter. My name is Harrison, as always, and today we have the Longines Zulu Time. We have the blue and the black. First things first, this comes in at 42mm, which is the exact same as my Omega Seamaster 300m, but in my opinion, this wears slightly bigger. And I think the reason that it wears slightly bigger is because the bezel is that little bit thinner than my Omega Seamaster. And what this thinner bezel does is gives it more dial real estate, so that the face of this watch actually looks bigger than my Omega, even though they're technically the same size. Now, one argument on that front is that this could be more readable than my Omega. That remains to be seen. The thickness on this model actually comes in at 13.9mm, which is surprisingly a little bit smaller than I thought that it would be. It sits a little bit closer to the wrist than I thought, which is actually a lot nicer for me. In my lifestyle, I tend to knock things about, so that when things sit that little bit higher or they have domed glass, I tend to just smash them off of things, totally by accident, but I do tend to smash them off of things. So I do like this slimmer feel. Remember that Chisholm Hunter are actually authorized retailers for Longines watches. If you want to shop either of these bad boys, then hit the link below. Moving on to the case and the bracelet. The case and the bracelet both come in stainless steel, which is one of my favorite metals. I've said this in a couple of different reviews, but what's better than that is the case and the bracelet have a combination of brushed and polished. Brushed being the more prominent, but the edges are being defined by that polished steel. When you look at the case, you can see the really sharp edges have been done in polished steel instead of the brushed. Now this reflects the light wonderfully and gives it a more, I'd say a more trendy, modern look. Longines has always been a classical brand, but this gives it an edge. The bracelet on this model is also extremely good looking. It has the same polished and brushed effect with a predominantly brushed feel. And I like that. It gives it some modern aesthetic without taking away of the practicality, because obviously polished steel scratches or shows scratches more than brush does. So I like bracelets that are predominantly brushed. I feel like if they're predominantly polished, it's more of a dress watch, but this is kind of more of an all-rounder. It has a deployant clasp at the back just here that seems sturdy and stable. It doesn't kind of have a tinny feel to it. It feels sort of expensive, shall we say. It also has micro adjustments right here, and I'll show you in the macro shot just so you can see it clearly, but it does have those micro adjustments which are really useful actually, especially when you've got slimmer wrists like me. They can fit that little bit more comfortably and that little bit more securely around your wrist. Moving quickly on to the crown and the bezel of this watch. Now obviously this is a GMT, so has a GMT bezel in black ceramic. Now ceramic is obviously better for a variety of different reasons, but one of which, the most important to me, is that it doesn't really scratch. Now personally, when I get a scratch on a watch or a car, I'm so drawn to it. I've got sort of ADHD and I just can't stop focusing on that one spot. So I really like this new ceramic, this goes throughout the industry, this new ceramic sort of series that is going on. Everyone's using ceramic and I really like it. And on that note, it is time for the wrist check. What do you have on your wrist at the moment? Please let me know in the comments. I thought it was time for a break from my Hamilton Khaki Field, so I put on an Omega Seamaster and I love it. Moving on to the crown, and listen, I understand that on pilots' watches the crowns are slightly larger, and that's because the pilots have big gloves and they need to get in to change the time with those big gloves. But I do prefer the sports crowns, the little more dainty crown guards. So there's a push and pull. You can't come to expect a pilot's watch with a sports watch's crown, even though my personal preference would side me with the sports watch. Moving straight into the face of this model, which is where the beauty really comes through to me. I think as a package, this works just so well with the rest of the watch. But I know that there's a couple of variations. There's the green, there's the blue, and there's the black. We only have the blue and the black, but please, by all means, take a look at the green. Drew prefers the blue. I prefer the black, but we'll have that debate later. Diving into the black version's dial. The bezel is, of course, black as well as the dial. Now, the dial actually comes in more of a matte black than a polished lacquered black. It's more of a matte texture, and I actually quite like that instead of the polished. On the bezel, it has white numerals which are extremely readable, even though that bezel is a little bit slimmer. The hands and the indices are highly polished in silver, and that plays wonderfully against that black, especially when you move it in the light. I'm moving it in the light at the moment, and it's so highly readable, and that's partly why I really like this. And actually, in general, that's partly why I like more muted colors. I just feel that they're so much more readable. But the one thing that I like above everything else is that really light blue GMT hand and the word Zulu Time in the light blue. I think that that is insane, and I love that splash of color. Drew and I have had multiple conversations where I have said, I just like little touches, little details that only watch nerds will pick up on. That's a good detail. Now this blue hand, this blue GMT hand is different on each of these models. So actually when we look at the blue, it has a splash of orange at the end instead of that splash of blue. When we look at the green, it has a black face, a green bezel, and the gold kind of indices. Now, the GMT hand on that is also gold. So I think that has the least pop, the least color, but it is a little bit more classy, so I can see why people go for it. I do just prefer the black. All of these models feature a screw down crown and have water resistance of 100 meters. That is combined with a sapphire crystal glass with anti-reflective coating on both sides. Now, there's a lot of debate in the watch industry about anti-reflective coating being put on both sides of the glass because technically speaking, it does scratch a little bit more. But from experience, having an Omega Seamaster that has that treatment on both sides of the glass, it's never scratched. And I've had it for 2 years. You should be okay. Now that we have covered the crown, we've covered the face, we've covered the case, let's move on to that movement. The movement on this model is the caliber L844.4. It's a self-winding mechanical movement beating at 25,200 vibrations per hour with a power reserve of approximately 72 hours. This movement is also certified by COSC. These beautiful Longines watches with the bracelet come in at £2,480. But with that, you get 72 hours of power. You get a COSC certified movement, a GMT functionality, not to mention they're good looking, sexy models. I mean, Longines really took me by surprise this year. And I say that honestly. Normally, they're kind of safer. They make beautiful watches, but they are a little bit safer, a little bit more elegant. This is cool. This is trendy. This is new. So I know what you guys are all thinking. You're thinking, Harrison, would you go with the blue or would you go with the black? And I would go with the black. But let me explain why. I think blue is the most popular color in the industry at the moment, closely followed by green. And I think if you're buying your first watch, you'll probably be attracted to the blue. You'll want to flash that watch. You'll want to show off your watch. And that's what blue does. It's quite classy, but it's also doesn't go totally below the radar. You can show off and it draws people in, it draws the eye. Whereas black is more discreet, more understated, and more classy. And I think that once you have a couple of watches in the bank, in your collection, you then go for more understated watches because you don't need to prove anything. You are a watch collector. Whereas when you want your first watch, you might go for that brighter color. I went with the black, but it's your decision. If you've enjoyed this video, make sure you hit this subscribe button for more. There's tons of exciting projects coming up really, really soon. My name is Harrison. This has been a Time in the Wrist episode. Thank you so much for watching, and I will see you next time.